Welcome to AI with AI. That's Artificial Intelligence with Andy Lachinsky, a podcast from CNA Talks where we discuss the latest breakthroughs and implications in artificial intelligence and autonomy. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to check out our website where we will post all the links that we discussed today. That's cna.org/CAAI. Well, Andy, this week we've got a special guest with us, Professor Chad Jenkins from the University of Michigan, here to talk with us about the latest robotics information going on over there. Some really fascinating stuff. So look forward to having that chat with him. But before we get to that, what is the latest and greatest in artificial intelligence and autonomy?
Well, let's jump right into some news. Although this week, I'm looking over our notes, they're really almost all like follow-ups to things we've talked about recently, but they're all interesting. So the first one is literally on our last podcast. So we're recording this on April 18th. And on podcast 5.12, so 2 weeks ago, we talked about the European Parliament's latest hearing to address the main issues concerning the proposal for the upcoming Artificial Intelligence Act, kind of preparing for the final vote that's scheduled to take place on 16-17 May. The Ada Lovelace Institute, it's a UK-based independent research institute founded by Neufeld Foundation. It's a charitable trust that was itself established in 1943. They've come up with an interesting report that proposes 18 recommendations that, if adopted, it could actually significantly broaden the scope of the Artificial Intelligence Act. But what I found interesting is that what they focus on really, in one way or another, there are kind of three main areas. The first is to ensure that those who ultimately are affected are empowered to participate in its regulation. And they spell out a couple of ideas for that. The second thrust or area is kind of reshaping what is meant by risk and extending it beyond just individual fundamental rights to include more systemic and environmental risks. So it's a significant broadening of it. And the third is to essentially clarify and strengthen the governance framework to accurately reflect how AI systems are developed and adapted between different actors. It's short to the point, but it's very specific. And it'll be interesting to see what and in what form, if any, it actually makes it into the AI Act. So that's coming up very shortly, so in about a month's time or so.
Yeah, that first part about making sure that those who are affected by it are empowered to participate kind of reminds me of the purpose behind human subject research and the laws about regulating, when things have to undergo an independent review board and things like that. So very interesting sort of recommending an opening of the aperture for the regulation. So as you said, it'll be interesting to see what the Parliament decides to do.
Next follow-up story. So about another year and a half ago or so, podcast 3.44, remember we talked about something called neural radiance fields. You remember that? Introduced by NVIDIA, basically reconstructing a 3D scene from a handful of 2D images. The story here, this was what NVIDIA showcased in a new system called Instant NeRF. And NVIDIA had a developer conference back at the tail end of March, and this is where this was demoed. The story is the previous technology, which again was introduced barely a year and a half ago or so, NVIDIA has been able to accelerate the process 1,000 times.
Wow.
Literally, from what used to take hours to train for a scene, now it can take minutes. And it can be trained to run on a single NVIDIA GPU.
Wow.
So we are, in a very rapid fashion, we've moved from kind of a technology demo to something that can honestly be used, for real. For 3D artists, it is a remarkable technology that's accelerated just really, really quickly. So it's a fascinating thing. We'll provide a couple of links to some interesting demos.
Yeah, definitely check out the demo video. It is a great homage and really well done, and it just perfectly demonstrates the power of this technology. So definitely check it out.
The next story is kind of a segue into the quick research we'll do in a second. And it's research on its own, but the real story is on a meta level. So what am I talking about? So in the beginning of April, I found on the arXiv preprint site, there's what might loosely be called a book. It's a 200-page paper, and it's essentially it's called a roadmap for big model, quote unquote. That's what it's called, a roadmap for big model. What caught my eye is not so much what it contains. It's actually a really nice summary of large models that we'll see some examples of in a few minutes. But as I say, the real story for me is kind of on a meta level because of who wrote it and what the affiliations are of the authors that you'll see on this paper. There are close to 100 Chinese affiliated researchers. Most are affiliated just obviously with Chinese research institutes. A few appear prima facie when you look at the first page. It kind of reads almost like a paper from high energy physics because of the number of names, that you see on the author page. Mm-hmm. Some of them appear to be affiliated with like Microsoft, Columbia University, University of Montreal. So at first sight, you kind of, you're tempted to turn the page and just read the paper. You should read the paper. It's a good paper. Mm-hmm. But, and it's a big but, all of those that appear to be affiliated with Western institutes, they have an asterisk. And when you go to see what the asterisk refers to, quote unquote, produced by the Beijing Academy of Artificial Intelligence, BAAI. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is what it is. But therein lies what for me is the meta story that, remember we talked about about half a year ago or so, Stanford's foundation models paper? Mm-hmm. Well, here is, I think, to me anyway, it's a clear message that says, well, as far as China is concerned, they are looking at large models as kind of government-sponsored research. That's a very different thing from how we see things being done here, where it's only the Googles and the Microsofts and, large organizations that are going to be training these massive models. So apart from the pure science part of this, and as I want to stress that it's a really nice paper. I mean, it gives a beautiful overview of large models in the modern vein. But the undercurrent of what is propelling this and who is writing this and for what reason and what insights it may be giving us into how two vastly different channels of research, namely in the Western world and in China. It'll just be interesting to see how this develops. But I think they put a clear flag in the sand, or whatever the metaphor is.
It's going to be very interesting. And it leads into the next topic, which is on scaling language models. So what's the deal there?
Yeah, so we have two really big news research items, very quick to describe, but it'll take a long time to kind of sift through. The first one is from Google AI, talk about big models. So GPT-3, right? The OpenAI large language model. And it is big, right? Has 175 billion parameters. Well, it's no longer the top dog. Google AI has produced a model it calls the Pathways Language Model, PaLM. And it's about 3 times bigger in terms of number of parameters, 540 billion. Yeah. To train it, this is not something you're going to be doing in your backyard. Over 6,000 tensor processor units. All right, so it's not a small little system. But what's fascinating, they go through an interesting set of experiments that reveal, dare I say, yet another level of performance. What do I mean by that? So for number one, just in terms of language understanding and generation, and keep in mind, I just want to stress that we've now jumped from what the previous high was from GPT-3 to 540 billion parameters, right? It includes something that's nebulously defined as high-quality web documents, but a whole bunch of books, all of Wikipedia, GitHub code, and so on. And there's another variant we'll get to in a second that includes a little bit more code that they call PaLM Coder. We'll get to that in a second. So language understanding and generation, they evaluated PaLM on 29 different widely used English natural language processing tasks. And essentially, it beat the state-of-the-art prior large models on 28 of 29 tasks. When they probed the behavior of PaLM on something called the Beyond the Imitation Game benchmark called Big Bench. It's a recently released suite that has about 150 new language model tasks. They found that PaLM outperformed average human intelligence for the first time. So we've reached yet another level. And this is one of the core capabilities that they identify on their blog that they call breakthrough capabilities. I mean, it really is rather impressive. And if you think that's impressive, listen to the next one. This actually took me aback a little bit. In terms of, or the category of reasoning, Google highlights several breakthrough capabilities. The first one being that it solves 58% of the problems in a benchmark called, so PaLM solves 58% of the problems in a benchmark called GSM 8K. Forget the name. It's just something that consists of a bunch of challenging grade school level math problems. Why that's significant is, number one, it outperformed the prior top score that was achieved by GPT-3, the 175 billion model, but with training on additional sets, so it had to be fine-tuned. This required no fine-tuning at all. What's really interesting is that it's beginning to approach the 60% average, which is the fraction of problems solved by 9 to 12-year-old humans. This is the target audience for the question set. That's not even the most impressive part. The most impressive part is that PaLM can now generate explicit explanations for scenarios that require some complex combination of like logical inference. It can, for example, explain jokes. And there are a couple of examples here. That's stunning. I didn't expect that. And it's very impressive. So we don't have the time here, unfortunately, to do it justice, but they have plenty of examples on the blog and in the technical paper. I encourage people to look at that. It really is impressive.
Definitely check out the explaining the jokes, because it even explains in one case an anti-joke that it's no joke at all, and it gets it. So, or at least it explains it. So it's really fascinating to see what it sort of describes. So I'd be kind of curious to explore where that starts to break down. But the examples they have are certainly impressive.
You imagine, as with all these things, they're probably cherry-picked to a degree, right? But it's not to say it's not impressive. And it clearly represents what they claim, which is another level. It's a breakthrough kind of on another level. And just briefly we'll mention, because I mentioned it before, there's a variant of PaLM called PaLM Coder. It includes a little bit more, maybe 2 or 3 times the size of Python code tokens as opposed to the regular PaLM. But what's significant is that the performance basically is on par with the fine-tuned codex that we talked about, with the 12 billion parameter model, while using 50 times less Python code for the training. It's a really solid performance, and I urge people to just go and look for themselves, certainly on the blog, because there are lots of interesting examples.
Yeah, no, that's great.
The second quick story, it's quick only in terms of being able to describe it. Back about a year, maybe 14 months ago, podcast 4.14, we talked about OpenAI's DALL-E, and it's an image generator, or more specifically, a text-to-image generator. Well, OpenAI has come up with a second version, not surprisingly, called DALL-E 2. It's faster. It's much higher resolution. I think they scaled up from like 240 or 320 to maybe 1024 by 1024. And it's touted as kind of the next greatest thing, which it is. There are some remarkable images that come out of this, and the Twitter universe kind of lit up. And so I started looking around. But if it sounds a little bit familiar to our listeners, what you probably are recalling is that you and I talked about something called Glide not too long ago, back in January on podcast 5.6. As far as I can tell, this essentially uses the same technology that Glide offered. Perhaps a few bells and whistles. And to remind people, DALL-E works basically in 2 stages. It uses a variant of CLIP that we talked about for the earlier variant. It's a language model OpenAI developed, and it translates text prompts into an intermediate form, right? That's presumably captures kind of the latent space, the key characteristics of an image. What DALL-E 2 does is actually the variant of it. It doesn't use so much CLIP as unclip. CLIP was designed to look at images and summarize their contents the way a human would. Well, the new work uses this unclip system, which is kind of a decoder model. It's an inverted version of CLIP. It starts with a description and works its way back towards an image. The reason they do that is they try to correct some of the flaws that the first DALL-E using the CLIP system had. And remember, I think we talked about it, where you can take an apple, let's say, like a Granny Smith, and you can put a label on it, literally write a piece of paper with the word iPod on it, and it would sort of confuse the system. Well, because unclip allows you to, in a sense, create a whole bunch of variations of an image that presumably preserve the semantics and style while varying the non-essential details. The hope was, and indeed it succeeds in many ways, to kind of mitigate that problem. It's a powerful system, to be sure. There's a comparison with Glide, and there are 3 categories in which they compare when they use humans to judge, how different and how much better or worse is DALL-E compared to Glide and to a couple of other systems. So they judge it in terms of photorealism, in terms of caption similarity, and diversity. Now, where DALL-E 2 shines is in the diversity. Depending on how you're looking at it, between 60 and 70% of people prefer DALL-E 2 to the previous best kind of Glide. But in terms of photorealism and caption similarity, it frankly is kind of on the level and maybe does a little bit worse. That's not to denigrate it in any way. It's a remarkably powerful system, and it's a lot of fun to play with. But I was just curious how Glide came out not too long ago, and there was a little bit of a discussion that I saw, but perhaps it didn't have the catchy phrase DALL-E or, association with it. And I've just seen so much discussion of, we're on the brink of artificial general intelligence again, and how remarkable. And so without belaboring it too much, one of the things you'll find here is that, yes, it is great at producing these photorealistic images, but in many ways, and they're very upfront in the paper, it's worse at certain attributes that you'd expect of it, not even an artificial general intelligence, it's just an artificial intelligence. It's actually worse than Glide. One of the things in which it's worse at is what's called binding. If you ask something seemingly simple as put a red block on top of a blue one, something like that, but you're trying to bind a color with a location, let's say. Glide doesn't have a particular problem with it, whereas DALL-E 2 actually has a lot of problems. Sometimes it's red on blue, sometimes they're on the side, sometimes it doesn't make sense, and there are other couple of issues. So it's still a work in progress, but as a next step, it certainly offers a dramatically higher resolution where, kind of like with the NVIDIA, even as just a research vehicle, it's already powerful enough that I suspect a lot of artists will enjoy using it just for the creative possibilities.
Yeah, there's some pretty fantastic images that they've seeded it with just to show the fun that it can have with it. But, again, as pointing out what you said about the lack of clarity about what was the deal with Glide, it just kind of makes it, because that was also an open AI system. It just makes me wonder if there's some sort of like internal different groups working on things, and maybe just the DALL-E group has a better public affairs campaign, or I don't know. It's kind of, it is weird.
Yeah, interesting. Next little story is a white paper that we've been meaning to get to, but it fell off the queue a couple of times. This is from a magazine article. Magazine is Nautilus. It's one of my favorites. And this was published back on March 10th. And it's published by Gary Marcus. No need to tell our audience, right? He's author of, among many other things, Rebooting AI that we talked about. It was one of our book of the weeks. But anyway, he wrote a really nice, succinct article, a couple of new things that I wasn't aware of in it. The title of the piece is Deep Learning is Hitting a Wall. What would it take for AI to make real progress? Now, regular listeners of ours know that we've talked about Gary Marcus many, many times, and he's a very, very strong proponent of deep learning simply not being everything we need for artificial general intelligence, but symbolics and symbolic processing is kind of the missing key. So he spells out his argument very eloquently, but one of the really neat examples, I hadn't seen this before, is he gives an example of a competition called NetHack Challenge that took place, I guess, at the tail end of last year.
Yeah, so NetHack is a game that was first created, I guess, in the late 80s. When you see it, it looks like a bunch of symbols and stuff on the screen that are laying out a map, and you're one symbol in the map that you can move around. So it's all ASCII characters. And it presents you, rooms and enemies and things to interact with and, fight and lots of interesting things to do. But it's all in symbols. And it's randomly generated every time you create a new game. So the floor is never the same. There's certain characteristics that always will appear, but always in a different location. And so nothing is ever the same twice. So that is the premise here for the NetHack Challenge, where I guess they attempted to see what they can do compared to deep learning entries. And if I'm reading this correctly, they sort of got 3 times a better score than the best deep learning system using a symbolic learning approach, right?
It seems on the surface, right, that it should be like a cakewalk for deep learning. I mean, the deep learning is solved, quote unquote, Go and chess and all these things. And no, it doesn't. It was crushed by the symbol manipulation systems. That's fascinating. Just go and read it. It's a non-technical article, but it's filled with interesting arguments and so on. And that'll do it for the first part of the podcast.
All right. Well, we'll be back after a short break with our interview with Professor Chad Jenkins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Schroden. I direct CNA's Countering Threats and Challenges program, which helps the U.S. government better understand and counter state and non-state threats to U.S. national security. Analysts for my program understand these issues deeply because they've conducted fieldwork or provided on-site, real-time analytic support to U.S. government leaders in over 40 countries during the past 3 years. To learn more about how we can help you, please contact me directly at jonathan.schroden@cna.org.
We have Professor Chad Jenkins back with us to chat about the latest in robotics and news from the University of Michigan. Dave and I last spoke with Chad over a year and a half ago. I checked this. This is podcast 4.4 back in October in 2020. We had a great chat with Chad about his research, a variety of other topics, including at that time, I think, the culture of research in AI and how students are experiencing AI research today. As a reminder, Chad is a professor of computer science and engineering at the University of Michigan, and director of the Laboratory for Perception, Robotics, and Grounded Reasoning Systems, or Progress. He also serves on CNA's Board of Trustees. Welcome, Chad. It's really nice to have you back.
Thank you so much, Andy. This is a tremendous pleasure, and I really enjoy the insights of the podcast, so I'm glad I can contribute.
We're going to have a nice chat. Normally, everybody's hearing my voice. Normally, Dave starts this out, and Dave and I tag team on interviews. But since we sometimes, as today, record on different days, Dave unfortunately had a conflict, couldn't make it. He sends his regrets. So, Chad, looking at the website of the University of Michigan, looks like there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening. You guys have a new robotics major, apparently the first of its kind, right, in the nation's top 10 engineering schools. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so we're really excited about what we're building here in Michigan Robotics. Not only are we launching an undergraduate major, the first of its kind, as you said, amongst top 10 engineering departments, and we're also creating a new robotics department. And so this is really the first of its kind. This is a large part meant to grow the academy, grow the needs of our students, of our nation, for the needs of the 21st century.
Take us back in time a little bit. I mean, this is obviously not something that happened overnight. When did this originate, and how did it all gel together?
So a lot of it started before I came to the University of Michigan in 2015. We had a number of great people like Jesse Grizzle, Don Tilbury, and Ella Atkins, who are noted roboticists, control theorists, and people that study experimental drones and unmanned aerial systems. So they got together along with some leaders in autonomous driving. They created a robotics institute, and that robotics institute started a robotics graduate program, really helped grow out robotics and help it take shape. And I saw that from afar. I was still a faculty member at Brown University at the time. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I really want to be a part of this. So I came over in 2015. We've seen this massive growth in our graduate program. We've seen robotics take shape from just being a research area that intersects with artificial intelligence and mechanical engineering and computing to being something that it's really its own discipline. It's really the study of what we call embodied intelligence. That is machines that can sense the world, reason about how to achieve its goals in the world, take actions to realize those goals, and do it in a way that works with human users and improves our productivity and quality of life. So really, this rise has seen us just grow out of the needs that we can't necessarily serve in your standard computer science department or mechanical engineering department. And it's been really catalyzed by the growth of artificial intelligence.
You mentioned a bunch of obvious overlaps already, like AI, engineering, computer science, and so on. So I guess this first thrust, I'm assuming there's going to be lots of overlap, and you're kind of leveraging a variety of courses and other initiatives that you have at the university. What is going to be, walk us through what these courses are going to be like? What is the student going to experience?
So what makes robotics unique as a discipline is the ability to act and reason in the physical world. And so there are some things that we want to elevate from our graduate program that students would take maybe as a senior in college, but usually as a master's student or a doctoral student, and put that into the undergraduate experience. So those would be things like autonomous navigation. Robots have to be able to build maps of their environment, be able to know where they are in that environment, and plan paths in those areas. There's high overlap between autonomous navigation and areas of artificial intelligence, such as computer vision, machine learning, but there are certain aspects of it that are unique to robotics that we can elevate into experiences students could get in their second or third year. There are certain other things that we're seeing, such as the ability to model and control robot manipulators that could be used in our supply chains, that could be used for manufacturing, and a number of different areas that are right now relegated mostly to graduate students, but we're going to make it available to undergraduate students. We're seeing a lot of demand from our graduate students. In fact, in our College of Engineering, the highest paid graduates are the robotics students. They're just barely above computer science at a number that makes me question whether I should stay in academia. We can see there's demand out there across the public sector, the private sector, industry, for government. How do we meet this need? And right now, our computer science program has, I think, over 2,700 majors. And so that sort of is giving us the signal that we're trying to shove too many people through computer science, which is right now the route to artificial intelligence. We're creating robotics to grow this out to better meet these needs for our nation.
So is there a sense of how many students you expect, how large a program this is going to be? It's probably going to be growing, but where are you going to be starting? What's your target?
Right. Right. So we have projections at this point. In fact, we are, at the time of this recording, we're not official just yet. We have a proposal to create the major that is with the state of Michigan, and hopefully it will be approved very soon. And, our department was moving ahead. We're full steam ahead on that. But I would say that from our projections, we could look like we would have somewhere around 400 to 450 majors at any one time when we reached steady state. That would make us one of the larger majors in an already large university. It would make us still small compared to computer science, but on par, reaching what you would see of a mechanical engineering department or an electrical engineering department, because we see that demand. Some of the things that we're also seeing is that we believe this will help some students, because a lot of students want artificial intelligence. So that takes them down the path to doing computer science. By the time they realize that they wanted to be a mechanical engineer or an aerospace engineer or a naval engineer, they're already committed to doing computer science because they thought they wanted to do AI in the beginning. Right. If we give them earlier exposure, they can make better choices and they can populate the needs that we have a little bit better. This is trying to sort of rebalance where students are going to go in their career paths. As much as AI is great and amazing, we maybe don't need as many people doing AI in one particular way as we're seeing right now. We need more diversity in terms of the types of things that people are doing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need a naval engineer that understands computing and understands AI, but is really a naval engineer at heart. And that's part of the growth of the discipline, the way we've seen computing sort of grow and evolve to touch almost every part of our society.
Sure. No, it makes perfect sense. It's one of these things that up until you guys have done it, I would have naively have assumed if somebody asked me, well, are there robotics programs? Sure, there have to be. Well, no, they don't exist. And it makes perfect sense. AI and machine learning, I mean, they're still evolving, obviously, but they are now large enough and diverse enough in terms of the various research efforts and threads that they embody, that something like this makes perfect sense. I noticed on the website, I think it alludes to at some point that there's like a new building. Just tell us about it.
I am sitting to you talking right now from the Ford Motor Company Robotics building here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The building came online during 2020. I moved in 2021. There's very few places in our nation and in our world where you can go and see almost the entire diversity of robotics, from drones to walking robots and humanoid robots, to advanced manufacturing systems, underwater robots, and the kind of robots that I work on that are what we call mobile manipulation robots that can move around in space and can pick up things and work in human environments. I think the common analogy is Rosie the robot from the Jetsons. I think that's what people usually think of when they see our robot. So this building, it's a $75 million building, just meant to really think about, what does robots look like on the whole when robotics becomes its own discipline that students would study, and we would advance the knowledge of this new and emerging field.
So you look at the popular press, and I think last year Dave and I talked about, I think it's a British firm called Engineered Arts. They introduced the Amica robot. And Elon Musk, of course, he parades his human-like robots on stage, and apparently has promised that they're going to come close to performing human tasks by next year. Clearly, there's a little bit of a gulf between what one reads in the popular press and what the real research consists of. Do you see any confusion on the parts of young students who are exposed to this for the first time, and maybe they see something like Elon Musk parading a robot on stage, and then they come to a real lab, and are they overwhelmed? Are they confused? How does that go?
I can completely see that. In fact, I oftentimes see some of those issues where students don't quite know what robotics is. But one thing that we're very fortunate to build on is FIRST Robotics. So a lot of students take FIRST Robotics in high school. They start building their own systems. They start making them and then getting them to do things, and they're really excited. And they have these competitions, in towns and regions at the national level and also the world level. And it gets students excited, and they understand how to build robots from that, but they don't know how to make robotics do things on their own. And so a lot of our curriculum is designed to inspire students from the first day that they come onto campus. They can work with real robot systems. They can build those systems. We can show them how to do interesting things to help those robots perceive the world and take actions and achieve goals. And so autonomous navigation, I think, is one of the coolest things that we do in robotics. And it's a great way to teach introductory programming and artificial intelligence. So one of the things that brings robotics and AI together is A-star A-star search, is A-star pathfinding. So one thing that we're trying to do is teach introductory programming in a way that is more accessible to more students. Let's teach AI, let's teach introductory programming, do it with a robot, and hopefully we'll be able to inspire and prepare more students. And so these are some of the innovations that we can do as a new and emerging field.
That is so cool. In the time we have left, let me kind of pick on the research side of your brain, the latest and greatest in the robotics research at large. And the portal I want to use is in other domains in AI and machine learning, and I imagine it is now being infused more and more in robotics, is the multimodality, right? It's not just one particular channel of information that has to be processed by whatever. It's a software agent or a robot on the ground. You're seeing, you're hearing, you're touching, right? Haptic, vision, blah, blah, blah. So to what extent does that infuse the curriculum and the research that you do? And before you answer, I know I'm saying a lot, but I'm going to throw it in your lap in a second. I've been currently reading an interesting book, not by a machine learning researcher or AI. His name is Ian McGilchrist, and he's actually a psychiatrist by trade. A couple of years ago, he wrote kind of a notorious book called The Master and His Emissary. I don't know if you've heard of that, where the idea is, and he spends like 800 pages describing the difference between the left hemisphere and right hemisphere information processing in all animals and mammals, not just humans. He's just come out with like a 3,000-page volume called The Matter with Things. And the whole thesis is about what he calls kind of asymmetric attentive processing. But his main thesis is that the left hemisphere is principally concerned with the manipulation of the world, right? It looks at local detail, what is central in the foreground, what is easily grasped. The right hemisphere is concerned with understanding the world, how to relate to it. You look at the world holistically, including maybe things on the periphery and the background and everything that's not immediately graspable. Now, he's not talking about robots. Does any of this make sense? And is this what, at least a part of the robotics research, the cutting edge concerns? It's the manipulation of the world and what you must do concurrently with that, kind of like the Gary Marcus, we need a blend of deep learning and symbolics. You need to have an understanding, which is a more holistic thing. So anyway, I'm throwing it back in your lap. Somewhere there is a question, but I'm sure you'll have a comment or two.
I love everything that you just said. I'm looking forward to the time that we get to be together in person and discuss this at length, because I think you touched on so many issues that are on my mind as a researcher and what we're trying to do and with both the robotics major, our robotics department, but also with me and my own students. I think there's just a number of open questions. I tend to go back to being a more Bayesian, probabilistic inference kind of person. The things that were in vogue in AI and machine learning 15 years ago, that's where I gravitate to. My students all love neural networks, right? I always hear about end-to-end machine learning, pixels to torques. We have many battles, spirited intellectual discussions about what the right way to go is. I think the reality is that the answers are going to be somewhere between those two ideas and other different areas of artificial intelligence, because AI, what people think of as AI right now, will change. And it will change pretty quickly. It's been a moving target ever since we go back to the Dartmouth conference in the 50s and McCullough and Pitts before that. And so, I think one thing that we're paying a lot of attention to are things like transformer networks that are able to bring together these different types of multimodality, trying to think about, we're not just going to do just straight vision. We're going to need tactile and audio, and what kind of systems can we have to do this? And so the networks that we've seen that are attention-based, like transformers, have been good at being able to do this type of recall that we're seeing. I'm a fan of neural rendering. So there's these things called neural emittance radiance fields. I think I got that right, where you can actually take pictures and you can generate you can use neural networks to make new types of rendering of these
Dave and I just
scenes.
talked about it. I don't know if you've seen the latest NVIDIA demonstration. We just literally just talked about it, but on a different day. Within minutes, you can now render a 3D scene, literally in real time almost, within a few minutes.
I think I know what you're talking about, the demo. And when my group posted it on our Slack channel, I was like, wow, that's the real deal. That's amazing. We're learning so much from the neural side, from models of the brain that is helping us advance. We're just getting so much inspiration, so many great ideas. I do believe at the end of the day, biological computing that we have in our brain looks very different than digital computing or analog computing. Yeah. So I do think these ideas from Bayesian inference, from symbolic inference, search-based planning. We're going to need some combination of those. And that's what I've seen has been most successful when we're actually trying to get real robots to do real things in the real world. Because when I look back to the origins of AI, we were together. Robotics and AI was together with control theory and cognitive science in the beginning. And we kind of split up for a bit to go do our own thing and make those advancements to build up our knowledge. But as that happens, the real transformations come, the real transformative impact comes when these ideas come back together and rejoin. And so I think we're going to see more of that in the upcoming horizon.
When you're sitting in just the right place. So this is going to be really exciting to see what develops from all this. Chad, is there anything I should have asked you about and I forgot in all the excitement of the new program and these rather interesting ideas?
I will just add one other thing, which is I think there are going to be amazing new upper level classes that we're able to offer to seniors. And because we're essentially moving all this great material from the graduate level into undergraduate level. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is being able to offer courses in bipedal locomotion. I think the humanoid robots that we've seen in our streams, the C-3POs and those types of humanoids, even the ones that are more capable, avoiding any comments about the Terminator and Skynet, like a good roboticist should. I think we're going to see those types of robots that we've been imagining are on the horizon. And I'm really excited to get undergraduate students working with these types of robots and pushing the cutting edge with our graduate students and our colleagues across the world. I'm also very grateful for the great people at CNA and the great analysis they provide. I'm really fortunate to be a part of this community.
I feel as though I'm just sad that I'm not 40 years younger, because I'd be kind of clamoring to get into your institute and just start studying. Chad, thank you so much for dropping by. This is it's really exciting. It's always fun to chat with you. And next time I'm in Michigan, whenever that is, or whenever you come for a board meeting, you and I and Dave have to sit down and just shoot the breeze and chat about all these things.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andy. It's been a real honor and privilege.
The honor is mine. Thanks, Chad.
All right. Well, if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to check out our website where we will post all the links that we discussed today. That's cna.org/CAAI. But I, for one, welcome our new computer overlords. Thanks as always, Andy. I'll see you next time.
Sounds good.